We often find ourselves entangled in endless narratives about the events unfolding around us, the actions of others, and the torrent of emotions we experience. We recount these stories, seeking understanding and empathy, yet harboring a subtle desire for admiration. We label these accounts as tales of our wounds, our hardships, and our suffering. However, we repeat these narratives like mantras, unknowingly constructing an identity as helpless victims. And perhaps that is why nothing ever seems to change. A nagging question persistently echoes in my mind. I've shared my story with everyone, so why hasn't this feeling disappeared? The answer, perhaps, lies in the fact that we are merely articulating the pain, not actively seeking to heal it. We're revisiting the wounds, but failing to step outside the confines of the cycle. It's akin to standing before a mirror, consumed by frustration because the reflection remains unchanged. I'm not suggesting that confiding in others is inherently wrong. We all require a safe space to express ourselves. However, if that space only serves to keep you stagnant, wouldn't it be healthier to embrace silence and begin to move forward? Because if you pay close attention, the more frequently we repeat the same stories, the more challenging it becomes for our brains to distinguish between memories and reality. And even more alarmingly, we might unconsciously start to feel secure within those narratives. We might even become comfortable in the role of the injured party. Because when you're a victim, you're absolved of responsibility. All you need to do is feel sadness. Therefore, make a conscious decision to stop. Cease recounting the events of your life and instead start transforming them silently. Begin with a small step. There's no need to announce it to the world, no need to seek praise, because true transformation doesn't require witnesses. And if you ask, if I don't share my story with anyone, who will ever know about my struggles? The answer might be this: they don't need to know, because ultimately your results will speak louder than your stories. In this video, I invite you to delve into 7 life lessons derived from Stoic philosophy, which once learned and truly applied, will forever alter your life. Don't miss a single one, and don't forget to subscribe to our Spiritual Vibes channel for more insightful content. Let's begin. The first key principle to unlock is not to allow the opinions of others to control or influence you. Perhaps you felt as though your life doesn't truly belong to you. Your decisions, your choices, even the way you smile, all seem to be dictated by what others might think. From a young age, we've been shaped by the voices outside our heads, the comments of family members, the perspectives of friends, the taunts of strangers who don't even know who we truly are. And somewhere along the way, we began to mistake those external voices for our own inner voice. However, that might not be you at all. It's possible that you're living someone else's life, chasing standards that you yourself never agreed with. As we discussed earlier, many of us unknowingly repeating the same stories, but hidden behind those stories often lies an equally loud voice, the expectations of others. Perhaps you chose your major not because you loved it, but because it was a major with a promising future. Perhaps you're staying in a draining relationship only because you're afraid of being labeled a failure. Or perhaps you're working day and night not because you crave accomplishment, but because you're afraid of being seen as lazy. Then the question arises, who is actually living this life? Because if you live to be praised, then you will die from being ignored. And that's not just a dramatic exaggeration, it's a psychological fact. Our brains are indeed designed to respond to external validation, but when the sole measure of your happiness is validation, you're building your palace on constantly shifting ground. One of the most liberating things you can do is to say, I'm choosing this because I know why, and that's enough. But that's not easy if you grew up in a culture that worships hierarchy and considers the words of others as unwritten laws. So it's no wonder that many of us are afraid. Afraid to make our own decisions, afraid to be different, afraid of being labeled selfish. But who says that making your own decisions is selfish? If you know the reasons behind them, consider them with your heart, and are ready to bear the consequences, then you're not selfish, you're responsible. And responsibility is more mature than simply obeying. I'm not suggesting that you become a rebel, I'm only inviting you to re-examine things. How many of your decisions today truly came from within yourself? Try to imagine if no one knew about your life. No likes, no comments, no compliments, no criticism. you could live completely anonymously, what would you do? Would you still choose to live the same life? Or would you realize that most of what you're chasing today isn't for you, but for an audience you don't even know? We live in a noisy world. Everyone is talking, everyone is judging, but not all judgments need to be taken seriously. Sometimes the loudest voice isn't necessarily the truest voice, and sometimes the quiet voice that comes from within is the most honest. There's an interesting fact about this. Research shows that individuals raised in environments filled with social pressure tend to have higher levels of anxiety when they have to make personal decisions. They're used to relying on the green light from the outside, and when that signal doesn't appear, they feel lost. Some even feel guilty when doing something they enjoy simply because it doesn't align with the expectations of those around them. If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. And that's not a weakness, it's a signal that you need to save yourself from a war you never chose in the first place. So how do you get out of all that? Not by silencing everyone, but by starting to listen to your own voice. By realizing that you don't need to prove anything to anyone, by allowing yourself to be a version that not everyone likes, as long as it's the best version of you. And one more thing, if you want to know whether your decisions truly belong to you, try asking yourself this: if no one knew, would I still choose this? If your answer is yes, then that's a decision born from depth, not pressure. Maybe one day you'll reach a point where you make a big decision that no one understands. They'll say you're stupid, stubborn, and ungrateful. But they forget that what you're risking isn't your image, but your own life. And you only have one chance to live it. Don't waste that life just because you're afraid of being disliked. Now close your eyes. Imagine the life you want. Imagine your first small step today. You don't need to announce it to you, don't need to clarify, just live it. Because, as we discussed earlier, true transformation doesn't require witnesses. And as we will discuss in the next point, what will you do if you realize that this life won't last forever?
Remember that we will die. As we've already discussed in the previous point, many of us live in the shadow of other people's expectations. But there is one thing that is often more frightening than social judgment, namely the reality that one day, everything will end, including our lives. At first glance, it sounds bleak, but listen to this slowly. Imagine you're standing at a bus stop alone as dusk falls. Then you realize one thing. You don't know how much longer you will be in this world. It may sound cliché, but the reality is that you really don't know. And strangely, it is precisely because we don't know that we live as if we will live forever, putting off apologies, putting off starting, putting off being brave, even though time waits for no one. And when you realize it, you won't feel panic. You will feel present. Because when you realize you're going to die, you start to truly live. Death is not the enemy. It just can't be negotiated. We will all get there. The only question is, what kind of condition will we be in when we get there? Many people avoid talking about death because it is considered creepy or brings bad luck. Some believe that talking about death speeds up its arrival. But in reality, it is precisely by thinking about it that we are invited to live more honestly. Because when you realize that all of this will end, the question changes from what should I get to what should I leave behind? And that might be the reason why some people who have almost died look more alive than us. They are no longer afraid of losing their jobs, they no longer care too much about social dramas, and they no longer wait for the perfect time. They don't have time to be fake. They know that the only thing worth chasing is something that is meaningful, and you don't have to wait to be in the ICU to reach that realization. There was an interesting study about this. When people were asked to write down what they would do if they only had 24 hours to live, most wrote simple things. Hug my child, apologize to my mother, enjoy the morning sun. Not buy a house, not have 1 million followers, not prove anything to anyone. Something that you might be able to do today, but for some reason you haven't done yet. What are we actually afraid of? From death, dying, or not having time to live? Because maybe our biggest fear is not losing our breath, but losing the moments. Moments where we can love, forgive, change direction, realize small dreams that have only been in our phone notes. And as often happens, we always feel that we still have time until that time is really up. I know that contemplating death is not pleasant, but reality rarely feels comfortable. And it is precisely because of this that it makes you aware that if you want to try, take just one day. Live as if you know this is your last day, not by being reckless, but by being honest. Be honest with yourself about who you want to contact, what you want to start, what you should have ended. And pay attention to what things are not important. All the drama, all the words of others, all the burdens that you don't need slowly lose their shape. You start to feel light because there is no time to be anyone. All that is left is to be yourself. There is one interesting thing. Some experts say that awareness of death can increase inner peace and even reduce the tendency towards depression, because when we realize that our time is limited, we stop chasing things that are not important. We stop procrastinating. We stop waiting for the world to change and start changing from within. Even neurologically, the brains of people who routinely contemplate death tend to have more stable stress responses. They are more resistant to facing uncertainty because they have made peace with the greatest uncertainty, death itself. But of course, this is not for everyone. There are also those who become too afraid, too caught up in uncertainty until they forget how to live. That is why it's important to contemplate, not drown. Looking at death is not to make you give up, but so that you can rise up. Because people who realize that their lives can end at any time usually know where to go. And if you ask, if all of this will end, why should I care? Then the answer is simple. Precisely because all of this will end, everything you do becomes meaningful. Your smile, your time, your patience, your choices today all mean something precisely because it won't last forever. Try to imagine on an ordinary morning you open the window, air comes in, light touches your face, and you realize you are still alive. What will you do that day? Will you still want to procrastinate, or will you start walking calmly, consciously? Because you know that the time you have is a gift that is not given twice. Memento mori is not to scare you, but to remind you that life is temporary. And precisely because it is temporary, it's very precious. The third point, control what can be controlled. Release what can't. Sometimes life feels heavy, not because of what actually happens, but because we keep trying to control something that doesn't actually belong to us. Like trying to hold the rain with a leaky umbrella and then getting angry because we still get wet. Even though, as we've already discussed in the previous point, we all know there are limits that we can't cross. But strangely, we keep trying, as if that limit can be conjured into an entrance. We force other people to change according to our wishes. We are too busy with other people's attitudes, other people's opinions, other people's responses, even though what we can control is always how we react. And even that is sometimes difficult, but not impossible. Imagine you're sitting in a small shop in the afternoon, coffee in hand, light rain falling outside the window. You've had a bad day, or a bad week, or a year that, well, something big happened. Maybe the person you expected to change remains the same. Maybe the plans you made collapse just like that. Or maybe you yourself are running out of energy because you keep trying to control the direction from all sides. But in the midst of all that, you can still choose whether to continue cursing the storm or start to learn to strengthen yourself in it. Often what makes life feel chaotic is not the event itself, but because we expect it to happen according to our wishes. We forget that many things in this life happen without our permission. And if you think about it, maybe that's a good thing. Because if everything had to be according to our wishes, this life could just be a reflection of ego, not learning.
There is an interesting fact. In several studies, the stronger someone feels that they must control the outcome, the greater their level of anxiety. Because the more they chase certainty, the more they realize that the world is too vast to be mapped with their own map. And as many great figures have taught, the most we can hold on to is not the outcome, but how we choose, act, and behave. We too often hope that everything in life will go smoothly, but the reality is we can't even control today's weather. So why do we feel we can control other people's hearts or their ways of thinking? Maybe it's because we're afraid of losing or afraid of looking defeated, or we still believe that if we try hard enough, everything will change. But the reality of life doesn't always work that way. It's not because we're weak, but because the world wasn't made to always follow anyone's will. And maybe that's where the liberation lies. Because once you stop arranging everything, you have room to accept, not surrender, but be aware. Aware that not everything has to be arranged by us, not everything has to be fixed by us, not everything has to be fought for by us. Maybe you're trying to convince someone to stay, or hoping someone will see your efforts, or waiting for a miracle to happen from the outside. But you can't change someone who doesn't want to change. You can't control people's reactions to what you do. And you can't ensure that what you give will come back to you in the form you expect. But you can choose to remain sincere without expecting anything in return. You can choose not to be swallowed up by disappointment. You can choose to keep standing even though the wind isn't blowing in the direction you want. Some people call this acceptance. But on the other hand, sometimes acceptance is used as an excuse not to try anymore. And that's different. Acceptance is not stopping trying. Acceptance is trying with all your heart without tying yourself to the outcome. Then the question arises, if we can't control the outcome, what's the point of trying? The answer lies in the intention, not the result, because this life is not about ensuring everything succeeds, but ensuring that we remain good people, even if the results are not always as we expect. Have you ever wondered what your life would be like if you only focused on what you can control? For example, your time, your response, your thoughts, your emotions, your own direction. What would happen if you stopped trying to please everyone? What would happen if you stopped comparing yourself to other people? What would happen if you truly forgave without requiring them to realize they had hurt you? What might happen is not a change in the outside world, but in the world within you. And often, that's enough. Because sometimes peace doesn't come from a change in circumstances, but from the courage to say, I can't control this, and I'm okay with that. That's not a sign of giving up. It's a sign that you're building boundaries. And those boundaries are not to distance you from the world, but to keep your energy and sanity intact. We can't stop the storm, but we can choose not to be swept away by it. Now, try to imagine one thing that you've been trying to control so hard, whether it's someone, a past situation, or the future. Try to release it for a moment, not to give up, but to give yourself room to breathe. Because what you might need is not an instant solution, but a pause to realize that not everything has to be arranged by you. And if you ask, if I release it, who will hold on? Maybe the answer is that no one needs to hold on, because maybe it's not meant to be held. Remember, the key to living a fulfilling life lies not in controlling the uncontrollable, but in accepting what is and focusing on what you can change. Embrace the present moment, cultivate inner peace, and strive to live a life of purpose and meaning. As we conclude this journey through Stoic wisdom, I want to express my gratitude for your presence and engagement. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the 7 life lessons that can transform your perspective and empower you to live a more authentic and fulfilling life. If you found value in this video, I encourage you to subscribe to Ars Spiritual Vibes channel for more content that inspires and enriches your life.